Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of When Movies Were Good. Down here at the old home studio here in Melbourne, Australia, I'm Rachel with my co-host, my weekly guest star, Matt.
Yes, home, sweet studio home. That was what I could come up with on short notice.
Well, Matt and I have been gallivanting for the last few weeks. I went to Sydney, Matt went to regional Victoria.
Thank you, Dalesford. You put on a good show.
So we were sort of out and about and getting back into a few things, and so hence the reason our recording was pushed back. So thanks for bearing with us. We are, of course, tonight discussing some monster films as such. There's a lot of different monster films in the degree of where we talk about films right up to 1959, but we thought we'd choose two of the most well-known, and they're different kinds of monsters. One is a literal huge ape, and the other one is what it is has the potential to turn people into. So the first film we'll be discussing is the 1933 King Kong, and it's a pre-code monster film. And pre-code, as we know, Matt, how would you describe pre-code? That's kind of before they adapted a set of standards for films. Is that how you'd categorise it?
I'm not an expert, but pretty much from the late 30s, possibly around the war period, or maybe a bit earlier, they had a sensor body that monitored quite closely elements that could be shown in a film, and that could rate from things that are reasonable at any time, like to do with limitation of violence, etc. Mm-hmm. But it also could be quite aggressive in coded times, like showing no references to adultery being allowed, or being allowed to get away with adultery, even at some point laws against mixed-race couples being shown.
Yeah, so it's basically censorship, wasn't it?
So censorship. I mean, it does, like modern ratings classifications did grow out of that movement, but it was a very aggressive set of codes that even filmmakers at the time had to be quite clever with.
Yeah, that's it. So I think it was known as the Hayes Code, because that was the person, Hayes, I think it was the gentleman that sort of came up. And like you said, it was very, very harsh, and they had to have... So, but King Kong got past that because King Kong was pre-code, so... But yeah, pre-code Hollywood really was a brief era in Hollywood because they had to bring it in once the sound started coming into films, and obviously things could be more clearly discussed too.
Well, I think there was a silent film literally called Sex, so that was definitely pre-code.
Well, yeah, so we will actually do a pre-code one. Well, probably we could do several pre-code ones, because I'm sure I've seen one or two of the pre-code Hollywood, but
we had to go to the adult film store to find them if they're pre-code. I don't know.
Well, some of the actors that we have discussed here have done some pre-code films, so we'll have to go into the archives and see what we've got. But we'll move on with our pre-code film of the night, which is the first one that we're discussing, which is King Kong, 1933. So a while ago now, directed and produced by Merrin C. Cooper and Ernest B. Pardon the pronunciation if I get it wrong, Shodesack. And the screenplay was James Ashmore Creelin and Ruth Rose, so a woman writing for that one as well. And it was developed, I thought it was based on a book, but it was actually developed on a set of ideas by the writers. Our stars are the beautiful Fay Wray, who was the first scream queen, I guess you could say, Robert Armstrong and Bruce Cabot. And it tells the story of our huge gorilla friend, dubbed King Kong or Kong. And when these group of travellers, filmmakers, visit this prehistoric island he lives on with a lot of other interesting creatures, he sees this beautiful young woman that's kind of being offered up to him, and becomes obsessed with her, and yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to say right off the bat that very few major films I've seen have had more obviously tacky special effects, and yet in so long have I never been so engrossed by the storyline, like I couldn't stop watching.
Yeah.
It defied everything I was seeing in terms of special effects. Like, you could sort of see the plastic or rubber models that were moving about in stop motion, but the way they edited together, the storyline, it was completely enthralling.
Yeah, it was. I actually really enjoyed it. I suppose, even if you're a younger person, you may be familiar with the famous part, even of the 1933 film, never mind the sort of remakes that they've done over the years, of Kong on the Empire State Building. And it's just such a iconic moment in film history, and everyone's kind of familiar with that. But when you actually sit down and watch the whole film, which I had never done, I'm more familiar with the 1976 version with Jeff Bridges and Jessica Lange playing the Fay Wray role. I have very vivid memories of watching that one as a child, and of course always knew about the older one. But I have to say, it built up the intensity, and I just thought, yes, okay, the special effects aren't a patch on what they've got today, but they were enthralling. I was just sitting there the whole time thinking, how in the heck did they do that in 1933?
Well, I am fascinated by that sort of thing, but I didn't even care how they did it.
Yeah.
The story, it just pushed itself along. Like, I was watching it at about midnight onwards, because that was all I had, the only time I had to watch it, and I just completely woke up. I didn't feel the time at all. It just went by in a flash. And going back to the Empire State Building, actually just something funny occurred to me, that we do probably have a whole generation now that's used to associating that building with romance stories like An Affair to Remember and Sleepless in Seattle. But I'm thinking, before An Affair to Remember, most people would have thought, okay,
King Kong.
that's a building for a gorilla to go up on, and not not to have a marriage proposal.
Yeah, well, that's what I always think of the Empire State Building as, is the one that King Kong climbed up. So it's interesting how this film kind of got to be made, because apparently the audience in the early 30s had a fascination with films about animals and primates and all sorts of things like that. And, things like, Tarzan and, anything sort of shot in the wilderness, and different documentaries, and even some exploitation films about being in the wilderness. So even then, that was where it, and the director had a fascination with gorillas, and that's how it all got started. So I thought it was always off the basis of a specific novel, but it wasn't.
Yeah, and that fascination with apes, it goes a bit back, because actually an academic I know gave me a book that he wrote on the prevalence of apes in Western cultural fascination, sort of from the 1850s onwards, and so you have the films which are form quite a later part of the study, but also looking into a few major statues that were presented at exhibitions around the early 1900s, and going backwards, and certain lithography studies, because apparently the setting of Skull Island, because it has quite a distinctive visual look with the raptors and everything, it was apparently based quite closely on a famous lithographer, which I should have looked up before we came in.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, that's one of those topics that Google just doesn't provide you at the last minute when you think of it. So if you get a hold of Ted Gott's book on ape and the Western fascination, you can look it up there.
Oh, okay.
Get a hold of a copy. But yeah, that's so like apes do have quite a long fascination in it, and like there are varying degrees of what they could be regarded as a metaphor, and it's the same thing with looking at stories about mummies. With Boris Karloff and no, that's Frankenstein, but.
No, he played the mummy as well. Yeah.
I was.
You were right. Yeah.
It's nice when you're accidentally.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes. He did play the mummy as well. Yeah, you're right. So they actually hired the director hired. So RKO made this film, and he hired the best-selling British mystery adventure writer Edgar Wallace, and he was given the task of writing the screenplay and a novel based on this gorilla thing that Cooper had come up with, and he understood the appeal that this guy Edgar Wallace already had as a famous writer, and he wanted to publicise the film as being based on a novel by Edgar Wallace. So, okay, so that makes sense. So it was sort of a whole hodgepodge and mishmash of all a group of people getting together and coming up with the concept of King Kong.
Well, you hear of filmmakers buying a book just for the title. Apparently, they had to buy an author to make a title.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you know, I suppose Cooper, and when he went to RKO in 1932 to try and get the film made, you know, he had to bring in the actors, he had to bring in the people that were going to do the stop motion and really sort of sell it, because RKO was like, maybe not. And how good was it that he did? And I really, I mean, look, the whole thing with Skull Island, the whole concept of this prehistoric island. I mean, Matt and I were sort of reading about it before, because I was joking around saying, I was watching the, 2005 Peter Jackson remake, and I was like, what the heck with all these dinosaurs and this and that? And because I don't believe they had that at all in the 1976 version. It was sort of done in a different way. There was a giant snake or something like that, but not the dinosaurs. And then the look on my face when these dinosaurs jumped out, I was like, oh, hang on a minute. They actually were in the original plot for this film. And it was great. It was lots of fun. I mean, I love Tyrannosaurus Rex, so, I had a ball.
Yeah, well, it was great when you had Kong fighting against, like, the, not the T-Rex, it was like a...
like Stegosaurus or something.
Yeah, Stegosaurus.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I was a kid. I'm not up to scratch on my dinosaurs.
Yeah.
But, yeah, the way the tail's swishing, and, God, that part when they're going down the island, and then suddenly the dinosaur turns around and sees them and starts charging towards them. I was like, ooh, jitters.
Yeah, I actually thought, I've just, we were looking at some of the techniques of how they, and obviously Matt being a filmmaker himself and also being a great photographer would have more of an understanding than I would, but they had to use different sorts of composition. They had to use, pasting film together, obviously stop motion animation, but they had to use rear screen projection as well. They had to use the Dunning effect to combine two different bits of film and run them together. I mean, just how painstaking would that have been? I mean...
Well, yeah, I mean, it's hard enough when you're doing like a traditional animated sort of Disney cartoon movie, but at least with a pen and brush, you have everything to your control.
Yes.
They had to compose all those parts together, have to get the projection just right, and it's really clever in parts where they actually have like a sort of the hands of a monster actually interacting in the same space with where a human could be. It's one thing to have sort of a split screen and managing to have them independently and sort of time them just right, but to actually get it to the next level, sort of springing around a bit. It's so good.
Yeah, and they had to make several different models, and we were also speaking that Peter Jackson, who directed one of the remakes of King Kong, he actually owns one of them. So there's some footage of him out there with his with one of these Kongs that he owns, which is obviously degraded a lot now. So
there's just like the metal skeleton, because like 80-plus-year-old rubber doesn't last very well, so they had to peel it off, so it's just the metal structure.
Yeah, and also I guess with the all of the other animals on the island, all of the dinosaurs, and I think really basically maybe the Kong's hand and a few other things were sort of built to scale, because I know in the 1976 version that was the same thing. But really, you can't talk about King Kong without talking about just how the film was made. And I mean, you can separate it out in the modern monsterverse that King Kong now exists in with Godzilla, because everything is just boring with, computer CGI.
Yeah. We should probably mention at the time that we're recording this, Kong and Godzilla is in the theatre, so that's partly what motivated us to do this special. Yeah,
definitely. And I will go and see it, because I am a bit of a fan of Godzilla as well. But to me, Godzilla's the Japanese Godzilla. The American one just doesn't. I need real motion. I need real things. I don't care how tacky it looks. It's more interesting to me. I don't mind a bit of CGI working in with real stuff, but I need both. What about you?
One that can be well made can work. Like, I do love The Incredibles, but there is a certain magic to the true stop motion animation.
Yes.
It's, but also, like, it's easy to get caught up in technology. Like, we were even commenting before the show that when they made a sequel to King Kong, Son of Kong,
which we saw some of.
Like, even though that was made only, I think, like, not even a year after they finished the first one, you can tell that they had a better budget.
They'd stepped it up.
And because, like, the movement of the models is a lot smoother, so they probably had a lot more workers on it. But production value only takes it so far. And, like, it happens countless times. Like, a studio will have a great success with something done on a minimal budget but done well, like Psycho or King Kong or the Sound of Music wasn't low budget, but same principle. And then they'll start throwing huge amounts of money on a similar basic storyline, but just waste too much resources, overinflating a project that may or may not work.
Yeah, I mean, they actually had to do quite a bit of reshooting in King Kong as well. Some of the effects, like when the woman's Kong grabs the woman out of the window, and a lot of this was shot in Culver City in Los Angeles, but, it just was a mammoth, and then they would go back and see the dailies and see that it didn't look particularly good. So, I mean, it was just a really hard graft.
Apparently the fight between Kong and the Stegosaurus was actually one of the early bits that the filmmakers made independently as like a sort of a CV to give to the studio to see if they'd fund the project, and being that that's one of my favourite parts of the whole film, it's really sells itself.
Yeah, and I mean, actually the guys that made that horror film, Saw, they did that. The two Australian guys, James Wan and Lee Winnell, yes, that's his name. They actually did that here in Melbourne. They shot part of what they envisaged Saw would become, and that's how they got Saw made in Hollywood. So
it would be a shame if they didn't make the cut.
Thanks for that.
Couldn't resist.
So look, overall, I mean, it's, yes, there is a story here. There's a human aspect to the story. What sort of effect do humans have on undisturbed civilization? What are we doing to the earth? I suppose there's lots of things that are contemporary in King Kong, and I suppose that's why Kong is still around, and same with Godzilla as well. They are representation of a natural thing in the universe that can't quite be explained, and what right do we have to interfere with it or antagonize it?
And there are certain issues that seem to be glazed over even then, like they never quite explain what happens with the brides of Kong that they offer up in sacrifices.
I know you found that particularly interesting, that aspect.
Why do you make it sound so sinister?
I know, Matt was like, what does he want with Fay Ray's character? I'm like, I don't know. But
even the brides of the tribe living on the island beforehand.
Yeah, that's true.
And like pretty insulting. That they discriminate because of hair color. I think one's worth more than the other. So you kind of understand why some cultural analysts really dig into these sorts of films.
Yeah.
Although the filmmakers were determined to say that they would try and purely to entertain or thrill or at worst, like talk about the effects of trying to tame the untamed world.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot you could read into the film, but then by the same token, it seemed that they were trying to hit a niche in the market with a giant gorilla, because the audience seems to be fascinated in primates as a general rule at that time in cinema history. And maybe we don't need to read in too much to it. I guess you could just go on the journey of watching the film and, oh wow, that's interesting, look how they did that. And back then that would have been the bee's knees, like watching that in the cinema.
Oh yeah, people would have been thrilled out of their minds.
Yeah.
Although they actually sort of consciously sort of satirize the sensibilities of the popular audience, because the director's making a whole joke of how, I've got to have a girl for this movie. I mean, I've got the greatest adventure story, and like there's no romance in it.
Yeah, that was a bit jarring to me as well. I was like, oh, okay, I didn't realize. But look, on the whole, it's just a film that whether you're interested in classic films or not, if you're watching the current MonsterVerse with Kong and Godzilla and their foes, you do need to come back and watch the original Kong and the original Godzilla just to put it into perspective, I think.
It's one of those big ticks of the box in your lifetime. Like, I'll say that more clearly. It's one of your bucket list things. You need to do it.
Yes, King Kong's definitely one of the...
It's right up there with riding a water ski and going on the Great Wall.
Yes. And if you get a chance to visit Empire State Building, it might be a good thing on your bucket list as well.
Go there after dinner time. It's a bit crowded during the day.
Yeah, I know. Matt and I are fortunate that we've both been to New York City, and
don't think about doing a marriage proposal.
Yeah.
If you want to get someone in the mood for marriage, don't make them wait in the queue for 4 hours.
No, that's it. Although there mustn't be much of a queue there at the moment if it is actually open. But we'll jump over to California now, because we're heading over for Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is the 1956 American science fiction horror film directed by Don Siegel, and it stars Kevin McCarthy, who I actually know as an older actor because, of course, he starred in some primetime soaps, most notably Flamingo Road in the early 80s, and Dana Winter. I think we'd say Dana, but maybe the Americans would say Dana. So a black and white film shot in Super Scope, and I was saying to Matt when he came in to record tonight that I thought Invasion of the Body Snatchers would be right up his alley, because it was done almost like a film noir, and it was, even though it was science fiction, it was...
Well, yeah, it's like until probably the first half is done, you could have put in a slightly different plot and made it into a crime thriller. But yeah, like, I'm not normally that into science fiction, but this was a story that really just sort of lingered in my mind for ages afterwards. It's like my fiance sort of has to drag me to if she wants to see a new Stephen King film, but this particular story sort of really drew me in afterwards. Like, I was still feeling so bad for the lead after his girlfriend had been affected by I suppose we'll call it like the pod virus.
Oh, Kevin McCarthy's girlfriend, yeah.
Yeah, like that was one of the scariest scenes I've seen in a while, when we do a close-up on their faces and sort of we see the girl's eyes change, because like throughout the film they've done what is often forgotten now, the sort of beauty of wide spaces and wide shots, so that it really has that dramatic effect when you do go up close. A lot of films these days, because you can you so easily go up close and have autofocus systems that keep track of the subject. It's quite often a lot of films really like to exaggerate just being able to stay up close to everything all the time.
Yeah,
and
not having the
not
variation.
Taking that big space. Yeah, but when you have that variety of visual language, it can really be emphasised.
Yeah, so just for the audience, if they haven't seen Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is another one of these bucket list films, and there have been 2 remakes. There was one in the 70s, and also I remember I believe it's the late 80s or early 90s, so there have been 2 remakes of this, and probably lots of films that are similar and using similar themes.
You'll never look at snow peas.
Yeah. Giant ones, anyway.
Yeah.
So it is an extraterrestrial invasion, and it begins in the fictional California town of Santa Mira. And I was saying to Matt that Santa Mira has actually been used in several other films and books, most notably Halloween 3. That's where the guy that was the mad mask maker, his mask place, the company he had, Silver Shamrock, was set in Santa Mira. But John Carpenter's quite a fan of classic films and all the old classic tropes. So, hence the reason he named Donald Pleasance's character in Halloween Sam Loomis after Sam Loomis in Psycho. So basically a bunch of alien plant spores have fallen from space and grown into these large seed pods. So if you can visualize what Matt said, like a giant snow pea, and each one is capable of producing a visually identical replacement copy of human, and that does this while they're sleeping. Is that what they said? They were sleeping, and then this thing kind of assimilates into them. So, and when this Dr. Kevin McCarthy's character sorry, I forgot now, Miles Bennell. When his character, Dr. Bennell, comes back, he's confronted by people telling him that the people in the town are changing. And it's told through, is it pure flashback? Yeah, I guess, because he starts at the start saying,
it's a pretty clear plot sandwich because you're in that psychiatrist's office before and after.
Yes.
And that's kind of like a very easy way to create that dangerous situation of will they believe the guy or not. Like, in those sorts of situations, I'm always thinking, like, I can't actually tell them the actual truth. I need to make up some sort of convincing, plausible story, like, say that there's a plague going through the town or something, so they just bomb the city out. Don't tell the actual truth, just create some fib.
Yeah. So Kevin McCarthy's character, the doctor, is starts, as Matt said, in the office at the start. He goes back and explains what's happened, and over the course of the film, he as the doctor uncovers this quiet invasion that's going on with these pod people, and he attempts to stop it. So, and basically that, I've heard that slang expression before, oh, what are you, a pod person? And I never really understood what it meant. And I'm like, now I understand what a pod person actually means.
I haven't heard that expression, but maybe my school chums are just a different generation.
Oh, well, I saw it, of course, on an American soap opera. So that's where I heard it. So, this film has shades of other science fiction films. It's a touch of sort of War of the Worlds / Day of the Triffids /
It even reminds me of Bird Box, that film with Sandra Bullock that came out a couple of years ago, which is kind of all about this strange force that where if you sort of go outside or go to sleep, you'll be entrapped by it.
Yeah, or The Quiet Place, which is about those extraterrestrial things that have come to Earth and they can't see, it's the sound they can hear. So even though I wasn't that interested in both of those films, I thought they were a little bit long, and you know me with long films. But these sorts of films are a bit more interesting, and I would definitely like to watch a lot more science fiction films from this period.
It's one of those storylines where you can easily interpret so many or push so many meanings inside because there is such a vague motive behind what's happening.
Yeah, so I mean, look, the film had good pacing. When I saw Kevin McCarthy's face, I was like, hang on, I know this person, and I have seen him towards the latter part of his career. He actually had a part in a film that had a lot of things going against it, and that was the Twilight Zone film. Do you know much about that film? Kevin McCarthy was in one of the stories, so you know.
No, I've seen some of the original TV episodes.
Yeah, that go home tonight and look up just exactly what happened. It was shot in the early 80s, 1983, and it was like a big feature film. They did the Twilight Zone, and the whole film is incredibly creepy. And they've got a lot of very well-known actors like John Lithgow in it, Kevin McCarthy. But some terrible, horrible thing happened to 3 people on the set of that film. And nothing to go into now, but God, just knowing that fact alone, what happened to them. So that's something to look up. But getting back to what we're discussing. So this is based off Jack Finney's novel. And in the novel, it's the old sort of fable of it's never as good as the novel. And I'm sure there's lots of things in the novel. I haven't read the novel, have you?
No, I haven't. But it's like the old cartoon of the 2 goats eating a film reel, and one goat saying, "I prefer the book."
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, I tend to read a lot of true crime and historical sort of books and autobiographies. I don't tend to read a lot of sort of fiction works. And then often when I do, I remember reading Pet Sematary recently, one of Stephen, and I've been watching the first Pet Sematary film since I was a teenager, non-stop. And the book just couldn't match up to the film because the film was already far too ingrained into my mind. But if you read the book first, everyone says the book is much better. So Yeah, so Joseph Cotton was originally considered for the role that Kevin McCarthy played. And then we even had people like Anne Bancroft, Donna Reed, Kim Hunter, and the great Vera Miles who were considered for the role of Becky. So they did actually shoot right around the Los Angeles area and inside the Allied Artists Studios on the east side of Hollywood. What did you think of the look of the film?
Well, I thought the fact that it's even called Santa Myra makes a clear reference to it being sort of in the Californian area. And so at that time, people, I think, forget that California, most of the West Coast, had been barely settled up to the 1900s. So it was meant to be this, it's like a really good depiction of what was regarded as every man's America at the time.
Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned Joseph Cotton because he was in that Hitchcock film Shadow of a Doubt. Mm-hmm. And that was all about a typical all-American West Coast town and this sort of dark force from without could come in and sort of mess up the social order. And you could sort of... I have a feeling Joseph Cotton might have been a bit old by the time of the invasion of the Body Snatchers, but it would be an interesting interplay because he played his own... He almost played the alien invader part in Shadow of a Doubt.
Yeah.
So to have him in Teresa Wright's role almost in Body Snatchers, that would be a fascinating crossover.
Yeah, it is. And just reading here a little bit about the original intended ending, because at the end of... Spoiler alert, at the end of the film Invasion of the Body Snatchers, what the doctor has been telling them is confirmed when they find out that this bunch of pods has actually been found, because up until that point they were sort of like, what the heck is this guy talking about? And that was a narrative thing that was done by the studio, because it originally finished with him just on his own screaming, like playing out in real time and screaming as truckloads of pods pass him by and he can't do anything to stop them.
That would have been a great way to finish
it. Which I think it would have, but the studio didn't want a pessimistic conclusion, and that's why they added the prologue part and the epilogue, and then obviously they had him retelling the story to the psychiatrist because they wanted it to have a more optimistic outcome that something can be done to stop these things, and that's what they wanted to have. So, and then the FBI, of course, is notified and went on from there. So...
Although I find it hard to believe that the doctor would just suddenly call in the cavalry.
Yeah. Yeah, well, actually, years later, they were... The directors and the people involved in it actually said that they didn't particularly like that, but it was those in charge at, Allied Artists who were shooting the film that wanted that. So...
they control the people with the scissors.
Yeah, that's pretty much... Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. It had a theatrical release in February of 1956, and then they used sort of display pods made out of paper mache in the film lobbies, which would be kind of fun. I wonder if there's probably photos out there. I might see if I can find some and put them on our Facebook page.
In another world, they'd probably get opened up and photographers take pictures of babies in them with little Cabbage Patch outfits.
Yeah, Anne Geddes, isn't it? So as we conclude on Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I mean, here we go. The subtext of the conformity of post-war Eisenhower-era America. What do we think about that? Well, yeah.
It's possible, the same with the Crucible being a metaphor. Like, that was a definite metaphor for McCarthyism.
Yeah.
But I think one trouble with judging in this way is that so often when we're trying to interpret a storyline, we think that people's lives are ruled by the headlines of what happens to be on the newspaper at the time. And when I think of how I interact with news of events, like sometimes it impacts me, but quite often I'm like going through my life, and occasionally what's happening in the news might represent part of my life. But I'm trying to think that there's no way that an artist can accurately get a slice of my life or one of my friends or neighbours by reading what was on the front page of the Herald Sun that day.
Yeah, and also...
Quite the opposite, quite often.
Yeah, it does have that sort of foreboding fear. And then also at the time, the Cold War with the Soviet Union. And I guess, and then some other writers have also discussed the loss of personal autonomy during this time within the communist regimes around the world. So Yeah, I mean, if everyone's turning into a pod person and they don't really have much autonomy over their lives or what they're doing. So I think there's several different ways, but the whole film just does have a very creepy vibe to it.
Yeah, like, I still have a bit of chill in me about it. It's like some of the short stories by Roald Dahl I've started reading recently, and God, he could be, for a children's author, he could have a twisted imagination.
Yeah, Roald Dahl was an extremely talented storyteller, and I'm mostly familiar with his children's novels, but even those have a very adult sort of subtext to them as well, so...
Yeah, well, if you haven't read it, read the story Lamb to the Slaughter. That's a good one.
Okay, yeah, I'll take your advice on that. Well, I think we're about time to get ready to wrap this one up, and I thought both films were interesting. I enjoyed them. Two ones I wanted, especially King Kong, I wanted to tick off the list because there's just so many films to see. You could literally sit down night after night and you'll never get through everything. But that's the lifetime journey of when movies were good.
But yeah, I was glad to have this theme. I certainly gave both 5 popcorns out of 5.
Yeah. We will have to come up with a grading system, although we always start with the premise of that all of these movies are good, but there's certain aspects to them we may prefer more than others. So, yeah, definitely 2 monster flicks you should check out, and, especially if you've gone to see the newest King Kong film, which I will go and see, but the CGI gets a bit much for me at different times.
We wanted to do a review of the original Godzilla for this episode as well, but we just couldn't find a copy of it anywhere.
Yeah, well, I'll have to actually not even if anyone knows on a streaming platform, we're happy to pay for it, but I couldn't. Well, we might end up having to buy it. Maybe we'll go halves in it and we'll do it for another thing.
Possibly, yeah. I just even on streaming services just couldn't find it.
Yeah.
I don't know, are we going to have to find a drug dealer to get an underhand copy or something?
Yeah, because you can definitely get some of the later ones. They're not too hard to come by. But now, in light of recent events, we'll make an introduction to the next episode of When Movies Were Good. In light of the loss of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, recently, very sad for the Queen there, we've decided to have a royal theme, Matt, and we are going to do 1938's Marie Antoinette, starring Norma Shearer and Tyrone Power, to icons in the classic movie sphere. And then The Private Life of Henry VIII. Matt and I find Henry VIII a very interesting character. 1933 with the great Charles Laughton and directed by Alexander Korda. And we've got our royal theme.
Yeah, that'll be a very good topic to go over because it was quite a journey to find suitable films, because the natural choice was to look at a lot of those famous Shakespeare ones like Olivia's Hamlet, but we were planning on doing a Shakespeare episode at another time, so I was thinking, okay, we'll save those and we'll look at these 2 films which, like Philip himself, have very different interpretations of what it's like to go through life in the confines of royalty. Yeah,
and I mean, Prince Philip was, 10, 12 when these films were made anyway. So he was around for all of them. He may have seen a lot of these films in real time. So it just goes to show, God, the era that he lived through, nearly 100 years old. I mean, it's sad that he didn't make it to the 100th birthday, but he certainly had a good run.
Yeah, well, I guess you can testify that doing polo is good for your health.
Yeah. You just have to stay on the horse, though. But and also, Matt's just going to quickly run down our social media.
Yes, well, we have social media that necessitates that we talk about them now and then. So, we're on our YouTube channel. Hit subscribe and a thumbs up and a nice comment. That's always appreciated. We also have our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter feeds to get similar but very important for you to still pay attention to media releases.
And also tell us what you think about the films. Have you seen them? What do you think about them? Did you enjoy them? It's always interesting to hear how other people view the films and what they enjoyed or didn't enjoy about them. But in the meantime, as always, I'm Rachel.
I'm Matthew.
And we're watching good movies. Thank you and good night.